Welcome to Downtown Sports. My name is Downtown Stephen Brown, and in today's video, guys, I want to go over if the Maple Leafs should trade for Ben Chiarot, and I'm going to dive into a bunch of stats and a bunch of contextual information to pair with the numbers and ask the question seriously, because I know that it's a topic that a lot of people bring up in the comments section, and the team's actually expressed interest. According to Elliot Friedman on the 32 Thoughts podcast, he had said that the Maple Leafs have interest in Anaheim's Josh Manson and Montreal's Ben Chiarot. Before we dive into Ben Chiarot, though, I want to talk about a couple of things when it comes to Jake Muzzin and Justin Holl, just so that we have that context as we're moving forward. We showed this in a previous video, but Jake Muzzin and Justin Holl have actually been fairly effective playing together since the beginning of the new year. Now, it's in a small sample of 4 games, but it is a step in the right direction. Both players have just been sort of injured at different times, and that's why they haven't played together very much. But to give Justin Holl some credit, since the start of 2022, in terms of average game score, there's been no Maple Leaf defender better. And whether it be in a more offensively sheltered role playing next to Rasmus Sandin on the Maple Leafs' third pair, or without him in more of a neutral playing role, the Toronto Maple Leafs, when Justin Holl is on the ice since the start of 2022, have controlled the majority of the shot attempts, the actual shots, the actual goals for and against, the expected goals, the scoring opportunities, and the high danger shot attempts as well. He's been awesome since the start of 2022. But ideally, you would still like to upgrade on Justin Holl, and if there ever was an issue, it's nice to know that you have that chemistry, that deep pairing to go back to. And if you're looking at what type of defenseman the Maple Leafs would be in the market for to upgrade on Justin Holl, well, if you're looking at this quote from the middle of January where it talks about what Jake Muzzin has struggled with so far this year, Sheldon Keefe points to him struggling particularly carrying the puck. So in my mind, when I read this, it really only makes sense to go out there and acquire someone who's going to help Jake Muzzin with what he's struggled with so far this year, and that's moving the puck. Now, a puck-moving defenseman doesn't necessarily have to be one that's offensively minded. It's just someone who's responsible while they're carrying it. And maybe that allows Jake to simplify his game a little bit, and it allows him to be more effective in other areas of the ice. You know, there's no shame in him maybe not being able to carry the Maple Leaf shutdown pair anymore. He's 32 years old, and maybe he needs a little bit more help playing next to him than Justin Holl. You know, Morgan Rielly got TJ Brodie to play with. Where's Jake Muzzin's TJ Brodie? So the first guy that I wanted to talk about here is Ben Chiarot. And to start that off, I want to break down who he's been playing with so far this year. And it's primarily both Jeff Petrie and David Savard. It is worth pointing out that Ben Chiarot is going to be an unrestricted free agent at the end of this season. He's currently in the final year of a 3-year deal that sees him make $3.5 million against the salary cap. I'm not necessarily worried about his cap hit, but if the Maple Leafs did follow through with this, it would be back-to-back years where they would have paid a hefty price at the deadline for just a rental player. And the asking price on Ben Chiarot is rumored to be a first-round pick. And if we're just looking at something quick and dirty here on evolvinghockey.com and Ben Chiarot's player card, it's not a promising start so far. Hasn't had the greatest of year. But then again, I don't think anyone on Montreal has. It's very hard to be able to break down players who are maybe not having too great of a year on a very bad team. But a pretty decent place to start with that is looking at how Ben Chiarot and his teammates play with and without each other. And the guys in gray at the bottom here are guys who play with Ben Chiarot, and in terms of the expected goals against per 60, they're worse while playing with him. And the guys in red here, those are the guys without him, and they're better defensively. But that doesn't necessarily draw any conclusions. We need to look further in to know what role Ben Chiarot is playing on the Montreal Canadiens. If we're looking at puckiq.com here, we can see that there is no other defenseman on the Montreal Canadiens who plays as much of their ice time against elite competition in harsher defensive zone minutes than Ben Chiarot. If we're looking at Ben Chiarot's numbers overall and relative to his teammates, it's expected that they're not going to be the strongest because he plays in a much harsher role than they do defensively. And the Montreal Canadiens this year are not just regular bad, they're on pace to be one of the worst teams in the NHL over the last 30 years. And Ben Chiarot plays 23.5 minutes a night for them in a defensive role harsher than he's ever seen in his career, with less help than he's ever seen in his career. Earlier, we said that Ben Chiarot has played the majority of his season either with Jeff Petrie or David Savard. And if we're looking at his numbers with and without Jeff Petrie here, the numbers improve when playing next to Jeff Petrie and get even worse when playing next to David Savard. But I'm not really sure what to attribute that to. I mean, Jeff Petrie is a pretty good defenseman. And David Savard and Ben Chiarot as a D pairing together sounds like that would be very, very slow and not very effective. It sounds like something that you would just throw out there in the final 30 seconds of a game to just turtle and pray for the absolute best. If we're looking at his previous year's results playing with Shea Weber, it paints the same sort of a picture. Two guys playing in an extremely heavy defensive first role, but getting kind of shelled while doing it. If we're looking at Ben Chiarot's numbers away from Jeff Petrie against middle of the lineup type competition, so think like second and third liners here, they're still not very good. But if we're remembering back to earlier in the video when we looked at who his most common D partners have been so far this year, the ice time without Jeff Petrie is more or less with David Savard. And David Savard is no Jeff Petrie. And even if you're comparing him to Jake Muzzin on the Maple Leafs, it's just, no, Jake Muzzin is a lot better player. But if we're looking at the numbers relative to the rest of Ben Chiarot's teammates here, playing with David Savard even, it's almost break even in a very heavy defensive first role. But there's a couple of different ways that you can look at that. You know, his teammates are bad, but Ben Chiarot is better, or his teammates are just really that bad. I mean, if we're looking at his numbers from last year without Shea Weber against middle of the lineup type competition, it's a very small sample, but the numbers are in his favor, and he was able to be good with Shea Weber against middle of the lineup type competition. I don't have any doubts that he can play well against those types of players, but, you know, if we're looking to add a top four defenseman to play with Jake Muzzin, ideally it would be to reunite that shutdown line and have them play good against the other team's best players. And I don't think that Ben Chiarot is that caliber of player. But Steven, he was sure capable of shutting down the Maple Leafs top line in the playoffs last year with Shea Weber. And I mean, fine, if you want to look at it that way. But when Matthews, Marner, and Hyman were on the ice together last year against the Montreal Canadiens in the playoffs, they controlled the majority of the shot attempts, the majority of the actual shots, the majority of the actual goals, the expected goals, and the scoring opportunities quite handsomely. Any credit that you're giving Ben Chiarot and Shea Weber should probably be going to Carey Price. I respect him a lot for his work ethic and what he is, and that's a big, tough, strong defenseman who's going to hit and block shots and start fights, and also chew up almost 23 and a half minutes a night in a heavy defensive first role for a team that's not very good with not a lot of help. But also, Ben Chiarot is not a guy who's been necessarily known as a defenseman who's good at moving the puck. And that's what Jake Muzzin has struggled with this year. So you want to pay a first-round pick for a guy who's not necessarily the best puck mover and play him next to a guy who's also struggled moving the puck? That sounds like an absolute nightmare to me. I want the big, hulking, bruising defenseman just as much as you do. I miss Zach Bogosian from the end of last year too, right? Bogosian heading into the playoffs before he got injured was playing awesome for the Maple Leafs, and then when he did come back for them in the playoffs, he just wasn't able to regain that form. I don't think that Ben Chiarot is a good fit playing next to Jake Muzzin. So, unless you want to break up Morgan Rielly and TJ Brodie, who has been a consistent deep pairing for the Maple Leafs all season long in any situation and have had good chemistry going back to last year, I'm not interested in paying a first round pick for a guy who's going to play on their third pair. And at that point, you would have given up a first round pick, all the cap space that you have, and you wouldn't have found an upgrade over Justin Holl to play with Jake Muzzin. Like we showed earlier in the video, Justin Holl has been playing fairly well the last little bit, but that's been the story of the last couple of years. He goes through his ups and downs, but you just never know when those downs are going to be. Also, Ben Chiarot is a left-handed shooting defenseman who occasionally plays the right side. Maybe in about 800 minutes this year, just tallying this up really quickly, he's played about 120 of those on the right side. Ben Chiarot is big and mean, and that is something that the Maple Leafs need. But at the same time, he's not the greatest fit for them in terms of the way that he shoots, the way that he would fit playing next to Jake Muzzin, and the asking price as well. I fully acknowledge that maybe on a better team with some more consistent line mates, maybe not in as harsh of a role, playing on your second pair, that Ben Chiarot can give you some value there. But like I said, there are other options and other guys available, and we're going to take a look at them in the next coming weeks and the next month, really, because the trade deadline's not until March the 21st. Plus, the idea of trading with the Montreal Canadiens just kind of weirds me out. The last time we did it in 2018, it was for Thomas Plekanec, and he actually played a fairly decent role on the Maple Leafs that season and moving into the playoffs. No. If you were someone that wanted the Maple Leafs to maybe target Ben Chiarot at the trade deadline, how do you feel after watching this video? Do you still want them to go out and get him? Or maybe are you a little bit turned off and interested in the other options at this point? And let me know why, because I am genuinely curious. I don't use stats and numbers to throw it in everyone's face and say, no, this is the only correct answer. No, this is just the way that I'm going about having the conversation. The numbers are a helpful guide. They're not absolutely everything. They need to be contextualized properly, and I tried my best, man. We dove pretty deep. There's not really much else available in terms of public numbers. So that's going to be it for this video, guys. Make sure to like the video if you did like it, and subscribe for more, because more is always on the way. And guys, I'll be back in a couple of days where we're going to be looking at if the Maple Leafs should be interested in trading for Josh Manson. I know there's also been some rumors with him and Chiarot mentioned at the same time. So we're going to be doing the same deep dive into him in a couple of days from now. So I'll see you then.